Unashed, it started with a single unauthorized entry buried deep inside a routine security log at Buckingham Palace. At first, aides dismissed it as a technical malfunction, but within hours, senior royal protection officers were reportedly summoned behind closed doors, and King Charles himself was said to demand answers. What they uncovered allegedly exposed vulnerabilities stretching far beyond one isolated incident, raising fears that the monarchy's most protected sanctums were no longer secure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the incident was treated as little more than an administrative irregularity buried inside a mountain of routine security reports. Palace staff reportedly believed the system had simply flagged the wrong credentials, something that insiders claim happens occasionally within the sprawling network of royal estates. But according to whispers emerging from royal protection circles, the atmosphere changed dramatically once investigators began tracing the timeline connected to that mysterious entry. What they allegedly discovered sent shockwaves through the highest level, mouths of palace administration. Reports suggest the access point was connected to a restricted internal zone rarely approached without senior authorization, an area protected not only by surveillance systems but by layers of long-established royal protocol. Suddenly, what had seemed minor no longer looked accidental. Internal alarms were reportedly triggered almost immediately, prompting senior security officials to begin a rapid internal assessment before word could spread outside palace walls. According to various interpretations of the incident, aides working inside the palace that evening sensed something was deeply wrong, long before the public heard even a whisper. Meetings were allegedly called with unusual urgency. Protection officers moved quickly through corridors normally associated with ceremonial calm. And somewhere behind closed doors, sources claim King Charles was being briefed in real time as details continued to emerge. What reportedly unsettled the monarch most was not simply the possibility that a restricted zone had been compromised, but the growing fear that the breach may have exposed weaknesses buried inside royal protection systems for years. Palace insiders with whisper that several senior figures had previously raised concerns about aging surveillance infrastructure and overlapping chains of command, concerns that were allegedly pushed aside in favor of preserving tradition and avoiding institutional embarrassment. But now those old warnings were reportedly resurfacing with terrifying relevance. As emergency review meetings intensified inside Buckingham Palace, the mood among senior aides allegedly turned grim. Reports suggest investigators began reviewing access logs, movement records, and internal communication trails stretching back weeks. Some insiders even claimed certain unexplained irregularities had gone unnoticed for longer than anyone wanted to admit. That possibility alone reportedly triggered panic behind the scenes. Because if one breach could slip through unnoticed, how many others had come dangerously close to doing the same? Media insiders soon began picking up fragments of the story. Royal correspondents reportedly noticed unusual movements around the palace, increased security coordination, and a sudden tightening of internal communications. Although officials remained publicly silent, whispers of a serious internal scar, an eye, quickly started spreading across London's media circles. And as speculation intensified, one chilling realization reportedly began to settle over the palace itself. But what truly alarmed the king was not the breach itself. It was the realization that palace vulnerabilities may have existed for far longer than anyone dared admit. For decades, the royal palaces were presented as impenetrable fortresses guarded by layers of tradition, secrecy, and elite protection. Yet insiders now suggest the real danger may have come from complacency inside the system itself. Behind the ceremonial gates and historic walls, aging infrastructure, fragmented protocols, and overlapping chains of command allegedly created the exact conditions that made a breach possible. As panic quietly spread through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, investigators reportedly began uncovering concerns that had lingered beneath the surface for years. According to sources familiar with palace administration, certain surveillance systems operating inside older wings of the royal estate had allegedly not kept pace with modern security demands. Some insiders even claim portions of the monitoring infrastructure were relying on outdated technology vulnerable to delays, blind spots, and internal miscommunication. For an institution built upon precision, discretion, and control, the implications were deeply unsettling. What made the situation even more alarming was the growing realization that warnings may have existed long before the breach ever occurred. Reports suggest several palace insiders had quietly raised concerns over security vulnerabilities in previous years, particularly regarding the complicated web of agencies responsible for royal protection. Unlike ordinary government buildings, royal residences reportedly operate through layers of overlapping authority involving palace staff, private contractors, metropolitan protection officers, and specialized royal security units. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, that complexity may have unintentionally created dangerous gaps in accountability. When everyone shares responsibility, insiders whisper, sometimes no one fully controls the situation at all. As investigators examined internal records, claims of communication breakdowns between security teams allegedly began surfacing with increasing frequency. Sources close. Matter suggests there were moments during the incident where critical information may not have reached the appropriate personnel quickly enough. That delay, however brief, reportedly intensified fears that confusion inside the system could have made the breach far more dangerous than originally understood. Some royal commentators even began comparing the situation to previous palace intrusions that embarrassed the monarchy decades earlier. Incidents many believed belonged to another era entirely. But according to security analysts now weighing in behind the scenes, the latest breach may have exposed something far worse than a single lapse. It may have revealed structural weaknesses hidden beneath the image of royal invulnerability itself. Senior aides were reportedly growing increasingly frustrated by what some described as painfully slow modernization efforts inside palace operations. For years, tradition had remained one of the monarchy's greatest strengths. Yet insiders now suggest that same attachment to tradition may have delayed urgently needed updates to protection systems, staffing structures, and crisis coordination procedures. Questions also reportedly emerged surrounding staffing shortages, exhaustion among security personnel, and protocol gaps created during periods of heightened royal activity. Behind closed doors, there were whispers that the institution had simply become too dependent on routines that no longer matched the realities of modern threats. And as pressure mounted, a darker theory allegedly began taking shape among those closest to the investigation. Because the deeper officials looked into the breach, the harder it became to ignore certain irregularities surrounding timing, access patterns, and internal movement records. What first appeared to be institutional negligence was now beginning to raise entirely different fears inside palace walls. As investigators dug deeper into the breach, attention reportedly shifted toward one chilling possibility. This may not have been an accident at all. Sources now claim King Charles reacted with unusual urgency the moment details of the breach reached him. The monarch, already navigating enormous personal and constitutional pressures, reportedly viewed the incident not merely as a security failure, but as a direct threat to the institution itself. What followed was described by palace insiders as one of the most serious internal crackdowns in recent royal history. According to reports circulating among royal correspondents, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted almost instantly once the king was fully briefed. What had begun as a troubling internal investigation suddenly escalated into a palace-wide operation involving senior protection officials, intelligence advisors, and members of the royal household itself. Sources suggest Charles demanded immediate answers, not within days or weeks, but within hours. Those familiar with the situation claim the monarch became deeply unsettled by possibility that weaknesses inside royal security may have gone undetected under his reign. And for a king already carrying the enormous burden of safeguarding the monarchy during one of its most fragile modern chapters, the implications were reportedly impossible to ignore. Insiders now allege that emergency consultations were rapidly arranged with top royal security leadership as concerns spread through the institution. According to various interpretations of those meetings, Charles insisted upon what one source described as a no-exception approach. Every layer of palace emerged protection, every access point, every internal procedure was reportedly placed under immediate review. Senior staff were allegedly instructed to revisit protocols that had remained untouched for years, some dating back to systems originally designed during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The urgency behind those decisions reportedly reflected something deeper than operational concern. Palace insiders whisper that Charles feared the monarchy itself could suffer catastrophic reputational damage if the public began believing the royal family was vulnerable behind closed doors. As the review intensified, attention reportedly turned toward the growing risks surrounding public royal appearances. Security planners were allegedly forced to confront uncomfortable questions about exposure during crowded walkabouts, ceremonial events, and highly publicized gatherings involving senior royals. Sources close to palace operations claim discussions quickly expanded beyond the original breach itself, touching upon broader fears surrounding digital vulnerabilities, perimeter weaknesses, and the increasing sophistication of modern security threats. Some insiders even suggested that portions of the palace's protective framework were still relying on assumptions rooted in a very different era, one before constant surveillance culture, cyber risks, and instant global scrutiny. What made Charles's reaction especially striking, according to royal commentators, was how closely it reportedly mirrored the crisis management instincts of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. During moments of institutional danger, the late Queen was often described as calm, methodical, and utterly uncompromising when it came to preserving stability inside the crown. Insiders now claim Charles adopted a similarly disciplined posture, refusing to allow sentiment, hierarchy, or tradition to slow the investigation. Palace aides were reportedly warned that no department would be shielded from scrutiny, regardless of status or seniority. And behind the scenes, that uncompromising stance allegedly sent waves of anxiety through sections of the royal household unaccustomed to such aggressive internal oversight. Yet even as officials rushed to tighten procedures and reassure the institution, whispers surrounding the investigation continued growing darker, because investigators reportedly began uncovering inconsistent tendencies that did not fit the explanation of simple negligence alone. Certain timelines allegedly failed to align. Specific movements inside protected areas reportedly raised additional questions, and among those closest to the inquiry, a chilling fear was beginning to take hold that someone may have understood the palace's weaknesses far better than anyone initially believed. But while officials rushed to contain the fallout, another disturbing detail reportedly emerged from inside the investigation. Whispers inside royal circles soon focused on a mysterious figure allegedly linked to the breach, someone whose movements may have gone unnoticed for far too long. Reports remain heavily disputed, but palace insiders claim investigators became increasingly concerned about how close this individual may have come to restricted royal areas before alarms were finally raised. As tension escalated behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the investigation reportedly entered a far more unsettling phase. What had initially appeared to be a broad institutional failure was now allegedly narrowing toward the actions of a single unidentified individual. According to sources familiar with the inquiry, investigators began reconstructing movement records, access logs, and visitor clearance timelines with growing urgency. And somewhere within that mountain of information, they reportedly uncovered patterns that did not make sense. Certain entries appeared incomplete. Some verification procedures allegedly failed to match standard palace protocols. More disturbingly, whispers began spreading that specific movements inside protected zones may have escaped immediate detection altogether. The possibility alone sent shockwaves through royal protection circles. Palace insiders claim there was growing concern that this individual may have operated inside the palace environment, without triggering the level of scrutiny normally expected within one of the most heavily guarded institutions in Britain. Reports suggest questions were immediately raised about visitor verification procedures, temporary credentials, and the layers of authorization required to move between sensitive areas of the royal estate. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, investigators allegedly discovered moments where assumptions, routine familiarity, and administrative shortcuts may have quietly overridden stricter security discipline. In ordinary circumstances, such gaps might have remained unnoticed. But under the pressure of an active breach investigation, every overlooked detail suddenly appeared dangerous. As investigators pushed deeper, security personnel themselves reportedly came under intense internal questioning. Sources claim several staff members were asked to explain inconsistencies involving movement monitoring, communication timing, and clearance oversight. While no official accusations emerged publicly, insiders whisper that anxiety spread rapidly among sections of the royal household responsible for daily protection operations. The fear was no longer centered solely on how the breach occurred. It was now about whether deeper institutional complacency had created an environment where such an incident could happen at all. At the same time, royal aides were allegedly ordered to avoid discussing any aspect of the investigation publicly. According to media insiders, communication restrictions inside palace administration became unusually strict as concern grew over reputational fallout. Senior officials reportedly feared that even limited leaks could trigger a wave of damaging speculation surrounding the monarchy's ability to protect not only its properties, but the royal family itself. Yet despite efforts to contain the situation, fragments of the story continued slipping into the press. British media outlets soon began hinting at what some described as high-level embarrassment unfolding behind palace walls. The language remained cautious, but the undertone was unmistakable. Something serious had shaken the institution. What made the situation especially explosive was the widening perception that the palace may not have fully understood the scale of the problem when the breach first occurred. Royal commentators began quietly questioning whether the institution's long-standing culture of secrecy had delayed critical responses during the early stages of the investigation. And as those doubts spread, public concern reportedly intensified. Because for generations, the monarchy cultivated an image of absolute control, discipline, and protection. Now, that image was beginning to crack under the weight of uncertainty, confusion, and whispered suspicion. And as the palace tried to suppress growing speculation, public confidence in royal security, Monarchy reportedly began to fracture. The moment whispers of the breach reached the press, the atmosphere around the monarchy reportedly changed overnight. Questions flooded television panels, newspaper editorials, and royal commentary shows. If palace security could allegedly fail at the highest level, many began asking what else the institution had failed to protect behind closed doors. What had once been contained inside confidential briefings and guarded palace conversations was now rapidly becoming a national controversy. Across Britain, the story spread with astonishing speed as major media outlets began dissecting every rumored detail connected to the breach at Buckingham Palace. Royal commentators who had spent years defending the institution suddenly appeared, visibly unsettled by the seriousness of the allegations emerging from inside palace walls. Reports suggest producers at major networks scrambled to arrange emergency discussions with former protection officers, constitutional experts, and veteran royal correspondents, all trying to answer the same troubling question. How could something like this allegedly happen inside one of the most protected institutions in the world? Princess Anne emerged. As scrutiny intensified, newspapers reportedly began revisiting past royal security scares that many believed had long faded into history. Comparisons quickly surfaced to earlier intrusions involving palace trespassers and protection failures that once embarrassed the crown during previous decades. But according to insiders, the latest incident felt different, far more dangerous, because this was unfolding during a period of extraordinary vulnerability for the monarchy itself. King Charles was already facing enormous public pressure while trying to stabilize the institution during a deeply transitional era. And now, the palace reportedly found itself battling a growing perception that it may no longer fully control the environment surrounding the royal family. Public anxiety reportedly escalated as concerns spread regarding the safety of senior royals during official appearances and public engagements. Social media amplified every rumor, every anonymous claim, every fragment of leaked speculation. Some theories were wildly exaggerated. Others remained impossible to verify. But together they created an atmosphere of relentless uncertainty that palace officials struggled to contain. According to various interpretations of media coverage, the breach quickly evolved from a security story into something much larger, a referendum on the monarchy's preparedness, adaptability, and ability to function under modern pressures. And with every passing day, the palace's silence only fueled further suspicion. Critics began accusing royal officials of excessive secrecy, claiming the institution's instinct to tightly control information may have deepened public distrust rather than calming it. Reports suggest frustration grew among commentators who believed the palace was offering too little reassurance, while the story continued spiraling across headlines. Some insiders allegedly argued that officials feared transparency itself could expose even more vulnerabilities. Others whispered that senior aides were desperately trying to prevent panic inside the royal household, while investigators continued working behind the scenes. Either way, the damage to public confidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, and perhaps most alarming of all was the emotional shift now surrounding the monarchy in the public imagination. For generations, the crown projected stability, dominance and control even during moments of national crisis. But this incident reportedly pierced that image in a deeply personal way. The thought that restricted royal areas could allegedly be compromised left many questioning whether the institution had become dangerously dependent on reputation rather than readiness. That fear spread quickly not only through the media, but through the public itself. Yet behind the headlines and public outrage, insiders claim the palace was already preparing sweeping changes that could permanently reshape royal protection. According to reports emerging from royal administrative circles, King Charles has now ordered a sweeping review of every major palace protection protocol across the royal estate. What began as a single alarming breach may ultimately trigger the most significant modernization of royal security in decades, one designed not only to protect the monarchy, but to restore public confidence in the institution itself. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, the response reportedly moved far beyond damage control. Sources close to palace operations claim the king became determined to ensure that the breach would not simply be investigated. Isaiah emerged, but transformed into a turning point for the institution itself. According to insiders, senior officials were instructed to conduct a comprehensive review covering every layer of palace protection across the wider royal estate, including residential compounds, ceremonial access points, staff verification systems, and digital communication networks. The scale of the review reportedly stunned even longtime royal aides accustomed to the palace's traditionally cautious pace, because this was no longer about preserving appearances. It was about rebuilding confidence before public doubt hardened into permanent distrust. As investigators continued working behind closed doors, discussions allegedly intensified surrounding major upgrades to surveillance infrastructure and access control systems throughout royal properties. Reports suggest security advisors began examining vulnerabilities tied to outdated monitoring technology, restricted entry procedures, and internal communication systems that may no longer meet modern standards. Some insiders even claim proposals were quietly drafted involving expanded biometric verification measures, enhanced perimeter monitoring, and real-time digital tracking capabilities designed to eliminate the gaps exposed during the breach investigation. The monarchy, an institution rooted deeply in centuries of tradition, was now reportedly being forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that old systems alone could no longer guarantee protection in an increasingly unpredictable world. At the same time, scrutiny reportedly expanded beyond technology itself and toward the people operating inside the institution. Palace staff, contractors, temporary personnel, and support teams allegedly faced increased background reviews and procedural oversight as part of the broader security reassessment. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, officials feared that even minor inconsistencies in staffing procedures could create vulnerabilities capable of being exploited. That fear reportedly pushed senior administrators toward a far stricter culture of accountability than many within the royal household had previously experienced. Some insiders whispered that long-standing assumptions of trust inside palace operations were now being replaced by verification, documentation, and relentless internal review. The palace was also repeatedly reevaluating security surrounding royal travel and public appearances. Protection teams allegedly began reassessing movement coordination, crowd control strategies, transportation routes, and digital exposure risks connected to high-profile engagements involving senior royals. Sources suggest cybersecurity concerns became an especially urgent focus following fears that modern threats could target not only physical spaces but sensitive royal communications and scheduling systems as well. And according to some commentators, the scale of the response was beginning to resemble the sweeping modernization efforts undertaken by the monarchy after previous historic crises that once threatened institutional stability. Yet despite the aggressive reforms reportedly taking shape behind palace walls, insiders claim King Charles remained deeply aware that restoring systems would be easier than restoring perception. Because once the image of absolute security is shaken, rebuilding public trust becomes far more complicated than replacing cameras or rewriting protocols. The monarchy has long survived by projecting continuity, order, and resilience even during periods of turmoil. But now, the carefully preserved image had been pierced by uncertainty in a way few royal crises ever managed to achieve. But even as the palace moves forward, Many believe the breach has already changed something far more difficult to repair: the illusion of invulnerability surrounding the crown itself. For generations, the British monarchy cultivated an image of permanence, stability, and quiet control. Yet the breach reportedly exposed a far more fragile reality behind palace walls. In an era defined by digital threats, relentless scrutiny, and institutional distrust, some insiders now fear the crown may be entering one of its most vulnerable chapters in modern history. What once appeared untouchable now suddenly seemed exposed to the same uncertainties facing every modern institution struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Behind the traditions, ceremonies, and centuries-old rituals of Buckingham Palace, the monarchy reportedly found itself confronting a crisis that was not simply about security failures, but about survival in an age where public confidence can fracture almost overnight. According to royal commentators, the breach forced an uncomfortable national conversation about whether the institution responsible for symbolizing continuity was still capable of evolving quickly enough to protect itself against modern threats. And for many observers, the answer no longer seemed entirely certain. At the center of that pressure stood King Charles III, a monarch already navigating one of the most difficult periods any modern sovereign has faced. Reports suggest the king viewed the crisis not merely as a temporary embarrassment, but as part of a broader struggle defining his reign itself. Since ascending to the throne, Charles has reportedly worked to balance modernization with tradition, while trying to preserve the dignity and stability associated with the crown. But insiders now claim the breach exposed how fragile that balance may truly be, because every effort to modernize risks criticism from royal traditionalists, while every hesitation fuels accusations that the monarchy is trapped in outdated systems, no longer capable of protecting the institution or those inside it. That tension reportedly deepened divisions within palace circles themselves. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, some royal insiders believed sweeping reforms with hair urgently necessary to prevent future crises, even if those changes disrupted long-standing palace customs. Others allegedly feared that aggressive modernization could erode the very traditions that give the monarchy its symbolic power and historical identity. Behind closed doors, there were whispers of disagreement over how far the institution should go in embracing technological oversight, increased transparency, and stricter operational controls. For an establishment built upon hierarchy and discretion, even internal debate reportedly carried enormous emotional weight. At the same time, public expectations surrounding accountability were continuing to rise. The palace's instinct toward secrecy, once viewed as essential to protecting royal dignity, now reportedly appeared increasingly incompatible with a culture demanding transparency and immediate answers. Social media, non-stop news cycles, and growing public skepticism toward powerful institutions created pressures unlike anything previous generations of royals had experienced. And according to some commentators, the monarchy's greatest challenge may no longer be maintaining mystique, but proving competence in an era where every vulnerability is amplified instantly across the world. Questions surrounding preparedness for future threats also continued looming over the palace. Because while officials focused on repairing the immediate damage caused by the breach, many observers feared the crisis may have revealed something deeper about the monarchy's readiness for the unpredictable realities of the modern age. The institution had survived wars, scandals, abdications, and public outrage before, but this moment felt different. Less dramatic on the surface perhaps, yet potentially more dangerous beneath it. Because this crisis struck directly at the illusion of absolute control the monarchy spent generations carefully protecting. And as the palace confronts the aftermath, one final question continues to haunt royal observers across Britain. In the silent corridors of Buckingham Palace, the breach is reportedly no longer viewed as a single alarming incident but as a warning. A warning that even centuries-old institutions can become vulnerable when tradition moves slower than the dangers surrounding it. And according to royal insiders, King Charles now understands that protecting the monarchy may require far more protocol or history alone. As the immediate panic surrounding the investigation slowly began to settle, a heavier realization reportedly took hold inside palace walls. Sources close to the royal household claim the breach forced senior figures within the monarchy to confront something deeply uncomfortable. The institution could no longer rely solely on reputation, ritual, and historical prestige, to shield itself from modern vulnerabilities. For generations, the crown survived because it represented stability during uncertainty. But now, insiders whisper that the palace itself had become the source of uncertainty, exposing weaknesses that many believed should never have existed within Britain's most protected institution. According to various interpretations of discussions surrounding the crisis, King Charles became increasingly focused not only on repairing security systems, but on preserving institutional stability during an era already filled with extraordinary pressure. The monarchy had spent recent years navigating family divisions, public criticism, constitutional scrutiny, and relentless media attention. Yet this breach reportedly struck differently because it challenged one of the crown's most essential promises: protection. Not merely physical protection, but the broader illusion that the institution remained firmly in control regardless of the storms surrounding it. And once that illusion begins to fracture, restoring it becomes far more difficult than issuing official statements or tightening procedures behind closed doors. Palace officials reportedly now view modernization not as a choice, but as a necessity tied directly to the monarchy's future survival. Reports suggest discussions continue surrounding expanded surveillance capabilities, stricter internal oversight, stronger cybersecurity protections, and more aggressive coordination between agencies responsible for royal safety. But beyond technology and protocol, insiders claim the crisis has also triggered a profound internal reckoning about culture inside the institution itself. Questions are allegedly being asked about complacency, resistance to change, and whether certain traditions once considered strengths may now create dangerous blind spots in a rapidly evolving world. At the center of all of it remains the question of legacy. According to royal commentators, King Charles is acutely aware that moments like this shape how reigns are remembered. Some insiders even suggest the monarch fears history may judge not the ceremonial achievements of his reign, but whether he successfully guided the institution through one of its most fragile transitional periods in generations. Because the monarchy today faces challenges unlike anything previous sovereigns encountered: constant digital scrutiny, instant global speculation, threats that move faster than protocol, public trust that can collapse within hours rather than years. And behind every decision now lies the growing understanding that survival depends not only on preserving tradition, but on proving adaptability. Meanwhile, royal protection itself is reportedly entering a completely new era of examination. Public confidence, once assumed almost automatically, now appears increasingly tied to transparency, competence, and visible accountability. The breach may have begun as a hidden security scare buried inside internal reports, but it ultimately evolved into something much larger, a warning about the fragile balance between history and modern reality. And perhaps that is what continues haunting the most of all. The understanding that institutions built over centuries can still become vulnerable when they fail to evolve as quickly as the world surrounding them. Because in the end, the greatest threat to the crown may not come from outside the palace gates, but from the cracks left unnoticed within them. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.